Today's program is with Dr. David Cameron from the Department of History. David's an associate professor whose area of specialty is modern European history. He has spoken to our club, I think, 2 or 3 times before. He's one of our favorite speakers, Dr. David Cameron.
Now, if Scott here, during his presentation, starts to scream and yell for his mother, he had me about 10 years ago for a class. He's just having a flashback. You all hear me? I'm told I'm loud. Sometimes I'm told I'm loud and obnoxious. I know I'm loud. I'm assuming this is a pretty educated bunch. Sort of follows the news. You know, the events in North Africa, the Arab Spring, Egypt. I'll start with a quote today. The real strength of the nationalist movement in Egypt, however, lay not with these Levantines of the cafes, but with the mass of practically unchanged, bigoted Muslims to whom the movement meant driving out the foreigner, plundering and slaying the local Christian, and a return to all the violence and corruption which festered under the old-style Muslim rule, whether Asiatic or African. Now, you read this quote and you may think it's, I don't know, well, probably not from the New York Times, but you know, it could be commenting on current events, or you know, recent events in Egypt, in the Middle East. Actually, this is Teddy Roosevelt, over a century ago. Folks, what goes around comes around. Hilaire Belloc, who is unfortunately forgotten these days, British, Catholic apologist. In the late 30s, Belloc wrote the following: "Will not perhaps the temporal power of Islam return, and with it the menace of an armed Mohammedan world, which will shake off the domination of Europeans, still nominally Christian," they're less so these days, "and reappear as the prime enemy of our civilization? The future always comes as a surprise, but political wisdom consists in attempting at least some partial judgment of what that surprise may be. And for my part, I cannot but believe that a main unexpected thing of the future is the return of Islam." Now, Belloc is writing in the mid-20th century, when, you know, the 30s, one of the few things that Europeans were worried about was Islam. You know, Hitler, Stalin, not Islam. I want to talk about today's Europe. And, you know, I'm a historian, but I'm going to talk about Europe's future. And is Europe's future Islamic? Is Europe going to enter the Islamic world, become part of the Islamic world? These are both actually real headlines. The Economist and then Spiegel, which is the German weekly, you know, Mecca Deutschland, or Mecca Germany, you know, the silent Islamization. Edward Gibbon, 18th century, wrote this massive 4-volume, you know, Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. Commenting on the spread of Islam, he wrote the following: "A victorious line of march had been prolonged above 1,000 miles from the Rock of Gibraltar to the banks of the Loire." He's talking about the Muslim invasion of France out of Spain in the early medieval period. The repetition of an equal space would have carried the Saracens, 18th century for Muslims, to the confines of Poland and the highlands of Scotland. The Rhine is no more impassable than the Nile or the Euphrates, and the Arabian fleet might have sailed without a naval combat into the mouth of the Thames. Perhaps the interpretation of the Quran would now be taught in the schools of Oxford, and her pulpits might demonstrate to a circumcised people the sanctity and truth of the revelation of Muhammad. If Islam had not been stopped, which it finally was in the 16th and early 17th centuries, Europe might very well have been conquered in the early modern period, and things would be quite different today. But it was stopped. This is the spread of Islam. As you can see, by the time Muhammad dies in the year 632, much of the western Arabian Peninsula had been brought under Islamic control by Muhammad and his followers. And in pretty short order, within about a century and a half, 2 centuries of Muhammad's death, virtually the entire Middle East, much of what is today Iran, into Central Asia, into India, across the rim of North Africa, across the Straits of Gibraltar, virtually all of Spain, I mean, Islam spread extremely rapidly in the 2 to 3 centuries after the fall of Islam. And as you may or may not know, that, you know, what is today Algeria, Libya, Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, you know, Turkey, in the 5th and 6th, 7th centuries AD, were not Muslim, they were Christian. As a matter of fact, they were the heart of Christendom. By the time we get to the beginning of the 16th century, so the year 1500, you know, about 8 years after Columbus, much of North and Saharan Africa had been brought into the House of Islam. Islam had spread much further into Asia, South Asia, Central Asia. And if you look at Europe, from the perspective of Europeans, alive, you know, in the time of the Reformation, or the Renaissance, whether Europeans looked to the south, to the east, to the three sides really, what Europeans saw was an advancing Islam, and quite frankly, for several centuries, the tide is running in Islam's direction, and Europe is on the defensive. These huge swaths of territory, you know, that had been the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, that had been, you know, in sort of Western, well, Eastern Christendom, were now being brought into the House of Islam. And so, you know, Europe felt itself to be very much under siege. Well, by about the end of the 17th or the early 18th centuries, Islam has stopped. The main threat was no longer the Arabs, it was the Ottoman Turks. They had sort of picked up the mantle in the early modern period. Beginning of the 18th century and down into the 19th, it starts to run the other way. Islam goes into decline, certainly Islam in the Ottoman Empire in North Africa, that was in the Middle East. And in North Africa, in southeastern Europe, the Ottoman Empire shrinks, loses territory. And, you know, of course, at the end of the First World War, the Ottoman Empire collapses, and the states of the Middle East, what is today Syria, Lebanon, at the time Palestine, are brought into basically European empires. And so what it seemed to be, for several centuries, a mortal threat to Europe, the advance of Islam, whether by Arab armies, by the Turks, they besieged Vienna a couple of times in the 16th, 17th centuries. It seemed that this menace, if you will, to quote Gibbon or Belloc, had passed. Back to Belloc. Westerners have forgotten all about Islam. They never come in contact with it. They take for granted that it is decaying and that anyway, it is just a foreign religion which will not concern them. It is, as a fact, the most formidable and persistent enemy which our civilization has had, and may at any moment become as large a menace in the future as it had been in the past. It has always seemed to be possible, and even probable, that there would be a resurrection of Islam, and that our sons and grandsons would see the renewal of that tremendous struggle between the Christian culture and what has been for more than 1,000 years its greatest opponent. Now, he's writing this in 38, and I can tell you, as an Englishman in 1938, Hitler was far more on their minds than was Islam, the Muslim world. And so what had seemed for centuries, the relentless advance of Islam across the Mediterranean into Spain, southeastern Europe, toward Vienna, he's right, they'd largely forgotten about it. Islam had atrophied, that it was no longer the Islamic armies advancing. It was really the Europeans now mucking about, the Middle East, North Africa. But Belloc predicted it would be back. And I dare say if you had said to most Americans, most Westerners, I don't know, on September the 10th, a few years back, what do you mean Islam? Islam, yes, it's kind of weird. The Middle East, kind of crazy over there. Westerners didn't think much about it. Far away, no threat. Well, maybe Belloc was right. This is from Spiegel, a weekly German magazine, comes out, it's kind of like Time Newsweek. A recent ruling in Germany, this is 2007, about 6 years ago, in Germany by a judge who cited the Quran, underscores the dilemma the country faces in reconciling Western values with a growing immigrant population. A disturbing number of rulings are helping to create a parallel Muslim world in Germany that is welcoming to Islamic fundamentalists. The original purpose of the case was not to carry the clash of cultures into the courtroom. Instead, the case brought before Frankfurt's family court was that of a 26-year-old German woman of Moroccan origin who was terrified of her violent Moroccan husband, a man who had continued to threaten her despite having been ordered to stay away by the authorities. He had beaten his wife and had allegedly threatened to kill her. German law requires a 1-year separation before a divorce can be completed, and exceptions for an expedited process are only granted in extreme situations. When the woman's attorney, Barbara Becker-Roitschik, filed a petition for an expedited divorce, Judge Christa Gotz-Winter suddenly became inflexible. According to the judge, there was no evidence, quote, of an unreasonable hardship, close quote, that would make it necessary to dissolve the marriage immediately. Instead, the judge argued the woman should have, quote unquote, expected that her husband, who had grown up in a country influenced by Islamic traditions, would exercise, quote, the right to use corporal punishment, close quote, as his religion grants him. The judge even went so far as to quote the Quran in the grounds for her decision. Surah 4, verse 34, she wrote, the Quran contains, quote, both the husband's right to use corporal punishment against a disobedient wife and the establishment of the husband's superiority over the wife. So here you have a female German judge issuing a decision saying, no, you do not get an expedited divorce because you should have expected that as a husband from a Muslim background, he would strike you, he would beat you. Now, there's a lot I can go to this, multiculturalism and all sorts of stuff, but it's another talk. This is the former, thank God, Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, who once referred to himself as a hairy hippie. He wasn't far off. Dr. Williams said, an approach, this is an interview with the BBC, said an approach to law which simply said there's one law for everybody and that's all there is to be said, and anything else that commands your loyalty or allegiance is completely irrelevant in the process of the courts. I think that's a bit of a danger. Dr. Rowan Williams told Radio 4 World at One that the UK, quote, has to face up to the fact that some of its citizens do not relate to the British legal system. Dr. Williams argues that adopting parts of Islamic Sharia law would help maintain social cohesion. For example, Muslims could choose to have marital disputes or financial matters dealt with in a Sharia court. He says Muslims should not have to choose between, quote, the stark alternatives of cultural loyalty or state loyalty. And what you see going on all over Europe for several years now, sort of in the shadows, is the emergence of a parallel Sharia court system. What you see also in Western Europe, in France, well not so in France, in Britain, it's talk in other parts of Europe, is actually the governments institutionalizing this. Germany. According to a new study examining the values of Turkish Germans, 46% of the Turks in Germany hope that at some point there are more Muslims than Christians living in Germany. And I think we're rapidly getting there, at least if you look at who's actually practicing. Is this Europe of the 21st century? Or is this? Y'all heard of Pew, right? Pew survey, Pew does these sort of, periodic sort of surveys of religious attitudes all around the world, North America, Europe, everywhere. This is a Pew survey on Europe, religion in Europe, from 2011. And you can see here, 1990, that the Islamic population of this Europe is about 4.1%. Within 10 years, it's 5.1. Right, a couple of years ago, it's about 6.0 projected out. I think it's going to grow much more rapidly. But it's clearly growing. If you look at, again, estimated Muslim population in Austria, in 2010, about 500,000, about 5.7% of the population of Austria is now Muslim. Within 20 years, which ain't all that long, is projected to be nearly 10%, just over 9. Belgium, it's going to be 10. Denmark, I mean, Islam is rapidly growing in Europe. Much more so in Western Europe than in Eastern. Again, you can see by what, 2030, current projections in Western Europe, about 8.6%. And again, I think this is lowballing. In the next 20 years, the Muslim population of Britain is estimated to grow by almost 2.5 million. France by over 2 million. Belgium by 500,000. Look at percent-wise. The projection is in Ireland. Over the next 20 years, the Muslim population will grow by over 180%. Now again, no one can predict the future, but kind of current trends hold. Finland, Norway, Sweden, and the UK, but in many countries, particularly Western Europe, Scandinavia, the Muslim population is set to double. Now, we're still talking. Actually, if you go online, go to just Pew Survey, Google it, you'll find this. Look, it's a big long report, all sorts of interesting numbers and statistics. This immigration as of 2010. France, it was about 66,000. Again, almost 2/3 of it were Muslim. And I can tell you that since 2010, given the events, in Tunisia, in Libya, in Egypt, in the Arab Spring, all of the kind of turmoil that has occurred in the Middle East in the last 2 or 3 years, there are far more immigrants now headed to Europe. Many of them illegally, trying to understand to get out of the chaos that's engulfed much of the Arab Islamic world. Europe's the closest thing. They have pretty generous welfare states. Now, if you still look at it, it may be, well, so okay, in 20, 30 years, the population of Britain is 5 or 6% Islamic. They're not all crazy. They're probably reasonable people among many of them. And even if not, still 5% is not all that much. That means 95% is not. But if you start looking at the numbers and breaking it down, what you'll see, for example, is, again, 2010, so a couple years ago, in the age bracket 60 plus, only 10% of the population is Islamic. Look at 0 to 14, it's almost a quarter. 15 to 29, it's over a quarter. And so what you have in Western Europe is, yes, a Muslim population is 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9%. In France, it may be as high as 10. But it is not. It's an uneven population. It's very young, as opposed to, if you will, the native European population, which is much more middle-aged and older. And so that has all sorts of implications for the future. Again, already in Western Europe and in the UK, we're headed between 5 and 10%. But again, it's a much younger population. And one of the things young people tend to do that older people don't is have children. It's also an unevenly distributed population. The UK has a census every 10 years. They just did one in 2011. They're still putting out the numbers. But this is from 10 years ago. And you can see up in the British Midlands, cities like Bradford, Leeds, and some of the Rust Belt of old industrial England, that in some places the Muslim population is as high as 20, 30%. In London, actually this year, London is no longer a majority English city. The majority of the population of London is no longer native British. So it's very highly concentrated. If you look at France, the construction of mosques, 85 to 86, again, rapid. And so you'll have parts of, rural Germany, small towns in England, no Muslim population. You go to some neighborhoods in Berlin, in London, Paris, Brussels, Antwerp, and you're in the Middle East. And what you find, actually, is, again, it may be only 4 or 5% of the population, 6 or 7, but if it's highly concentrated, and so, yeah, it's 5% nationwide, but in certain cities, urban areas, in certain, electoral districts, it's 1/3 of the vote. What politicians have figured out is, well, how you get votes is you come out in favor of, Sharia courts. You kind of downplay issues, of assimilation, and certainly on the left of the political spectrum in Europe, among the socialist parties, the Greens, who were much more, kind of multiculturalism, diversity, and so the Islamic population, although it's small, I mean, think of here, the Hispanic population is what, 17% maybe? And the Republicans are terrified, if they don't get them, pander, they're going to, never be in power again. I think the black population in the U.S. is about 10%, but again, concentrated more in city, and politically quite powerful. I mean, good for them, it's a democracy, but magnified. This is from just this past May. One country, Britain. One country, 2 religions, and 2 very telling pictures. These are literally within just a couple of blocks of each other in East London. If you could tell, most of the people in the pews here are elderly. They're in the streets. The mosque's not big enough. It's also a way, quite frankly, to make it public we're here. Actually, I think in very short order, if you go purely by who goes to a religious service, most of Europe will be Muslim, because Christianity is dead in Europe. It's another lecture. Islam is not. And so you go purely by who is practices of faith, who goes to services, who tithe. Muslims. This is Kreuzberg Vermietet Einnahmen. Kreuzberg it's an old working class district of Berlin. It's now largely Islamic. Kreuzberg has forbidden or outlawed Christmas. If you go to Germany, there are Christmas markets, in lots of German towns. Berlin is pretty left-wing, and Kreuzberg is a very mixed population. And so, we don't want to have, Christian festivals that might upset people, and so let's just do away with them, or we'll call them winter festivals, or, sound familiar? Europeans have stopped having children. Another lecture. If you look at Europe, there is not a single country in Europe, not one, that has a birth rate high enough to maintain current population levels. To do that, your average woman, I'm told, has to have 2.2 children. I never quite figured out the 0.2, but France is 1.9, but again, it's who's having the babies. Germany's in virtually a death spiral. I read last week in the German press, the median age in Germany right now is 45. Wow. The fastest growing age demographic cohort in Germany is people over 80. It's a wealthy, prosperous country. They have a good healthcare system. There are more people in Germany over 60 than under 25. Again, that's another lecture. It's all connected. But you have populations that are rapidly aging, that are shrinking. Again, if you look at much of Central Europe, Eastern Europe, if current trends hold, the population will shrink. In some cases, quite dramatically. And what you have is a large influx of immigrants from South Asia, the Middle East, North Africa. Now, if you saw this picture, you would assume this is a photo from where? Give me a country or region of the world. India, Middle East, Dijon. And that should be a 2010, although 1010 maybe more. This is from June 6, 2010. Saturday afternoon, Francois Tenenbaum, socialist adjunct delegate for Solidarity and Health, to the mayor of Dijon, bestowed medals honoring the French family. the Mantle of the French Family, created in 1920 by decree, created in the wake of the First World War. Modified in October of '82, is an honorary distinction to worthy persons who are raising or who have raised many children, in order to pay homage to their merits and to show the gratitude of the nation. Thus, 21 mothers in the presence of their families received their medal. 8 silver medals, 6 or 7 children. Again, the names. These are North Africans, these are Arabs. 13 bronze, 4 or 5 children. No native French. Epinal, again, it's in the east of France, the German frontier, the border. Again, there were 7 medals given out, by the mayor of Epinal. Of the 5 who received one, 6, Origine Maghrebi, are North African. And again, she's 68, she had 7 children. Malika had 6 children. Yazaa had 6 children. Kadjoua had 6 children. Jamila had 5 children. Fatna had 5 children. I'm assuming Francoise, she had 4. Now, this isn't necessarily a problem, but you have in fairly short order a rather large influx of immigrants, legal, illegal, mostly from North Africa, the Middle East, in Britain's case, from India, Pakistan. It's often former colonial possessions. So lots of the French Muslims are of Tunisian, Algerian background, Indonesian, Dutch, British, Pakistani, and it's led to real problems. That European states don't tend to think of themselves as immigrant countries. We do, although again, there are issues here. But you have a sudden influx of a population that is often poor, often not very high skilled, culturally quite different, and not easily assimilable. You also have in Europe a kind of reigning ethos of multiculturalism, diversity, to force them to assimilate as racist. Again, sound familiar. And so you have large populations that are educated, that are low skill, that do not feel themselves to be French or British or German or whatever. And again, in some cities, it's 15, 20, 25, 30% of the population. Well, at least if you look at Hilar Belloc, and most of us, the 1990s, the Cold War's over, it's all just kind of, fat and happy, history has ended. Well, the last 10, 15 years, the events in the Middle East, terrorist attacks in Europe, here, around the globe, something's going on in the Islamic world. Madrid, London, France. This is about 8 years ago. There were a couple of youths who were fleeing the police, ran into a substation, a power substation, not a good idea, were electrocuted, and this set off riots throughout much of France, so much so that actually martial law was declared in France. Curfews imposed. It quickly spread throughout Paris and virtually every major French city. Welcome to Europe in the 21st century. French cities, many of them, are surrounded by these kind of high-rise apartment, kind of public housing complexes built really in the 1950s and 60s, for the French working class. The French working class have long since moved on. And so these kind of soulless, hideous, kind of relics of the 50s are now full of Muslims. And quite frankly, there are no goes. The French police won't go in there unless they absolutely have to. Sharia law holds drug dealing, a lot of pathology. You have increasing again throughout much of Europe, major European cities, what are basically no-go zones. The police won't go unless they have to. and the native population won't go near them because, you know, they're likely to be attacked, you know, or at worst, it's just hostile to the environment. There's no tension in Europe over this. A little humor with tomorrow's forecast. Cloudy with carbon fusion. London. Again, France again, 2007. Denmark. France. We'll stop. There are in parts of Europe already kind of low-level civil war. And I think as you have a native European population that is rapidly aging, and a much younger recent immigrant population that is not terribly well assimilated and not easily assimilated, you know, for lots of reasons. The Europeans aren't totally blameless in this. You're going to get more conflict. It's coming. It's already there. It's not terribly well reported. I mean, if you go to Paris, London, you know, you're in the central cities, the museums, you know, they keep it arm's bay. You go out to the neighborhoods, you go out into some of these, what at one time were kind of working class neighborhoods. You don't want to be there. Or maybe you do, I mean, but again, you've left Europe. You go to some parts of Berlin, what at one time were kind of working class districts, and you're in Turkey. You know, the street signs are in German. Everything else is well, I mean, again, it's not. I wouldn't have trouble here. I'd rather have our problem than there. You go in certain parts of the United States, and you've left America. You know, you're in South America, Central America, you're in Mexico. You know, that there's no one who speaks English. The culture is English, and that's fine. There's snow on that truck. Anyhow, I'll stop. Questions, comments? Yes, sir.
What do you think is the reason that Islam is growing? What's the attraction?
What's the attraction for whom?
For the people who are turning to Islam or becoming?
Well,
it's
I would
not
say
just
this.
all population, is it?
Well, these are actually Muslims. They're coming from the Middle East, going there. But what you also see is there's a trend in Europe, the trend here, more so in Europe, of native Europeans who are converting to Islam. And quite frankly, I think one of the reasons is that Europe has ceased to be a Christian civilization. It just has. And Europeans don't believe in anything. You know, environmentalism or the EU or, you know, God knows what the latest cause is. But people want to believe in something. You know, they want to feel that they're part of something, their life has meaning. Islam offers that. Christianity no longer does. And I think, you know, a lot of, you know, people, well, Bin Laden once said, look, when confronted with a strong horse and a weak horse, most people do back the strong horse. Whatever else Islam is, and in the world, it is pretty sure of itself. Christianity no longer is. And so for a lot of Europeans, it's something to believe in. And quite frankly, I think when people figure out that's the way the wind is blowing, and you know, for lots of Muslims who are not, they're not radicals, they just want to lead their lives, they're fine. But if there's a subset of the population that is militant, that is aggressive, and you know what, I think this guy's kind of crazy, but I'm a Muslim, and I'd rather be on his good side than his bad. I'm kind of in the club, and so let's just kind of go along. Let's not fight this. You had last year in Brussels, there's an Islamic party. It's called the Islam Party. And a couple of individuals ran for the city council in Brussels and ran openly on a platform of introducing Sharia law in Belgium. One of them won. And you know, the fact is, when some of the population of Brussels have complained about this, a number of politicians, socialist politicians, shut them down. They were being intolerant, they were Islamophobic, but they want to impose Sharia law. No, 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 you know, how dare it's bizarre. So, yes, sir.
Are they migrating there for opportunity or safety reasons?
It's a combination. They are migrating. After World War II, Europeans were rebuilding. It was the post-war boom in the 50s, 60s. There was a large influx of labor, sort of guest workers, you know, and again, it tended to break down on what your colonies were. So you had Pakistanis going, and West Indians, you know, going to Britain. You had, you know, Algerians, Moroccans going to France, Indonesians going to Holland. So it's that. It is also that. I mean, the Middle East is, even before the Arab Spring, even 20 years ago, it's a poor part of the world. And, you know, you go to Europe, and you can immediately latch onto the welfare state. Now, you know, maybe it's kind of crummy housing, and it's not a whole lot of money, but I'd rather be poor in France than poor in Egypt. And so it's that. The European governments themselves are acutely aware of the fact that they don't have babies anymore. They're not replacing themselves. But they have, and they like, their generous welfare states. You know, nationalized medicine, education, all this good stuff. Well, if you're going to have large welfare states paid for by fairly high rates, almost in some cases confiscatory rates of taxation, what do you need? Taxpayers. Europeans aren't producing them, so we're going to import them. But again, what they're finding is, you know, you're not going to have a large number of kind of, you know, semi-literate, low-skilled immigrants coming in who are going to be working in the French Quarter of Silicon Valley. And so many of them, they're actually a drag on the welfare system. Yeah.
The professor that was here with the Crater Series and her thoughts on Arab Spring,
Yeah.
and her thought of the government looking at the situation and deciding maybe the way we've been approaching the Arab nations, the Muslim nations, we're going to have to rethink how that's approached. I just was curious what you thought of that, and what's the answer? That's a tough question, I know.
You know what I really think?
Yeah.
I'd quarantine. That's what I'd do. I'd buy their oil. I'd pay them a fair market price. They want to live under Sharia law in Afghanistan. You go, girl. I would severely restrict, if not outright cease, all immigration to the United States, Western Europe from the Islamic world. Now that's going to shut out a lot of good people. But the fact of the matter is, there's no way to know. But you know, now I'm going to get in trouble. You may have you'll hear this phrase, apes and pigs. You know, the Jews are apes and pigs, the Jews are descendants of apes and pigs. Morsi, who was elected president of Egypt, you know, the Muslim Brotherhood, kind of got into trouble because they found these tapes where he kept referring to Jews as apes and pigs. Well, that's not a nice thing to say. And, you know, this kind of caused a big kind of scandal here. And you know, CNN, Fox, they all covered it. This is terrible. How, you know, oh my God, he's calling. What no one said is the phrase apes and pigs comes straight out of the Quran. So when they were insolent about that which they had been forbidden, we said to them, be apes, be despised. And you had already known about those who transgressed among you concerning the Sabbath, and we said to them, be apes, despised. Say, shall I inform you of what is worse than that as penalty from Allah? It is that of those whom Allah has cursed and with whom He has become angry and made of them apes and pigs and slaves of the Taghlid. Those who are worse in position and further astray from the sound ways. Talking about non-Muslims. The Quran refers to Jews as apes and pigs, as the descendants of apes and pigs. And so when a Muslim hears this, Morsi or something, well, the Jews, they're just they're all apes and pigs. So Muslim is exactly where it's from. Now, you know, one has to conclude that either the entire American media, I mean from Fox to MSNBC, either has really lousy researchers, or they know this. They just don't report it. You'll often hear, and I've seen this more than once, and I've heard it more than once. You know, people will bring up, you know, what seems to be, you know, the violence in Islam, you know, rather violent passages in the Quran, and you'll say, well, but the Quran says that whoever saves one life, it is as if he saved the entire world. That's a nice sentiment. And the Quran does say that. What they don't give you is the context. Now this is Allah talking to Muhammad about Cain and Abel. Then Allah sent a crow searching in the ground to show him how to hide the disgrace of his brother. He said, "Oh, woe to me! Have I failed to be like this crow and hide the body of my brother?" Cain. And he became of the regretful. He regretted what he'd done. He killed his brother on his fire. Because of that, we being Allah, decreed upon the children of Israel that whoever kills a soul, unless for a soul or for corruption done in the land, it is as if he had slain mankind entirely. And whoever saves one, it is as if he had saved mankind entirely. And our messengers had certainly come to them, i.e. the children of Israel, the Jews, with clear proofs that indeed many of them, even after that, throughout the land, were transgressors. This is an exhortation to the Jews. If you kill one, it's like you kill the entire world. If you save one life, it's as if you save the entire world. So when you see, oh, but the Quran, yes, the Quran does indeed say this. And it is Allah saying, this is what I said to the children of Israel. Next verse. Indeed, the penalty for those who wage war against Allah and His messenger, the messenger is Muhammad, and strive upon earth to cause corruption. Corruption often means, you know, trying to spread other religions to resist Islam. Is none but that they shall be killed or crucified, or that their hands and feet be cut off from opposite sides, or that they be exiled from the land. That is for them a disgrace in this world, and for them in the hereafter is a great punishment. So when you hear, and you'll see it all the time, you start paying, and I do pay attention now. Oh, but the Quran says, if it's not by, if you kill one, it's if you, yes, it does indeed say that. What it says is, this is Allah saying to the Jews. This is not directed at Muslims. So, you know, my solution is, we haven't, Balak was right. We've forgotten all about it. You know, I don't know. Read the Quran. Go look at the life of Muhammad. Read the Hadith. You'll find some very interesting things in there.
I've just recently moved here from Rolla, but they have just, within the last year, built a new mosque at Rolla to accommodate all the foreign folks who are there.
Well, there are some
received into the community with open arms.
Well, there are some imams in Europe that are quite, again, go back 500 years, you know, if you've been around in the 13th, 14th centuries, you might well have placed your bets Islam will conquer Europe. It's overrun North Africa, deep into India, Central Asia, Spain, you know, Constantinople. They're knocking at the gates of Vienna. Nothing stopped them yet, but they were. But there's another model. Muhammad is chased out. He's run out of Medina, or out of Mecca. They don't like him. They run him out. He and a handful of followers go where? They go to Medina, and they take it over. He then goes back and conquers Mecca. And there are some Muslims who say, imams, that's another model. You go, you establish communities, and you take over. I don't know. Yeah, he's coming.
You're out of time. I was just going to make one statement that I think Fox has got it right. Last time I was in Berlin, I found 3 or 4 stations that were Islamic, and one of them had the weather being given by a woman in a burqa, which is no fun at all.
It was cold out, I think. But anyhow, well, thanks. Now, if you put that up and I get fired, I'm gonna sue you.